Welcome to today's episode of Wellness Wednesdays. I'm Dr. Katherine Y. Brown, your host. This day is a special day on December 6th of 2022 because this is the 50th episode of the Wellness Wednesday show. We have been recording this show for 2 years throughout the entire COVID-19 pandemic, capturing the voices of faith-based leaders, researchers, academicians, children, families, mothers, you name it, we have probably interviewed them. And I will say thank you so much to our viewers all around the world for allowing me to be your host. But today, in the virtual studio, you are in for a treat. Hold tight for what is getting ready to happen, because I have two powerhouses in here. I have Reverend Edwin Sanders and Reverend Neely Williams. Now, these two people are people I consider mentors, friends, family, and everything. So let me welcome you both to Wellness Wednesdays.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much.
All right, so we're going to jump right in. Our topic today is fear, faith, family, and COVID-19. For our viewers, can you both just share just a short introduction of your background and the work that you do? Because you both do a lot in the community. So if I read the bio, I'd be here till next week for both of you. So Reverend Sanders, tell us a little about what you do for our viewers.
Well, thank you very much. I do consider it a distinct honor to be here with both of you. I mean, I have known Neely for years and years. As a matter of fact, we still include Neely as one of the pastoral conglomerate here at Metropolitan Church. And of course, Katherine Brown, you have been such a great facilitator of opportunity for us as we have gone about the business of trying to make sure that the work we do is a complement to the things that are happening on the larger stage, especially within the scientific community. One of the things that happened for me a number of years ago was a byproduct of the work that we've done for many years around HIV and AIDS. I always tell people Metropolitan Interdenominational Church was founded on February the 1st, 1981. And then we know that in the first week of June, 1981, is when the CDC first gave its announcement of the way in which this virus was impacting the communities that were most vulnerable at that initial stage. And of course, to us, it seemed distant initially, but I should tell you that we were a congregation in existence for almost 3 years, 2.5+ years. When the first person in our congregation died, we used to have a little thing we would say. We would tell people that if you come and join Metropolitan Church, you'll live forever, one way or another. So it was always a sense that we had never experienced a death. And then the first person to die was one of our founding members. And when he died from this strange disease that was on the horizon, which was just starting to manifest itself in terms of the various ways people were being impacted with diseases that were the byproduct of their compromised immune systems, we decided that this was something that was, and I guess I should say it this way because it's the reality of what was going on then. Early on, there was a way in which people talked about this disease as a gay white male disease, but it was very clear to us that it was a disease that was reflected in persons who brought certain vulnerabilities to the table in terms of all communities. And we suddenly realized the African-American community was one of them. So that's where we started. But since then, we started, and if I gave you a quick rundown of how it progressed, we started initially doing education work, then we did prevention work, then we took care of social services. And then after social services, we made the leap into becoming a care provider. And when there was a period when HRSA was going through an opportunity, well, a situation where they were looking for ways to bring to communities on a much broader base, persons who were dealing with this disease. And of course, by that time, we were doing all kinds of things that were a part of our prevention initiatives, not the least of which is that we also were involved in doing syringe exchange. Probably, and I've had people say this to us and kind of verified with us, we probably one of the first half dozen churches in the United States that were involved in doing syringe exchange. We had an unique situation here in Nashville, in that we were able to get the persons in the larger arena of politics and healthcare who were willing to acknowledge the CDC findings. And even though there had been some reluctance in terms of syringe exchange being addressed within the federal arena, it turned out that by having a person who was at that point the head of the health department, and then having a person who was the district attorney, and having a police chief who was a part of our community defense, who all agreed that if we did the work that we were trying to do around syringe exchange within the framework that they agreed to with us, that there would not be any negative consequences for persons who ended up in one way or another being in the faced with what could have been legalistic issues around doing this. Now, I should tell you that all of that led to, for me, a series of involvements. One of them was to become a member of the board of the Drug Policy Alliance, which was a very aggressive force in terms of dealing with the ways in which injection drug use and drug use, period, was contributing to the rate of infection in communities. Not long after I began to work with that group, there were other opportunities that emerged. And the way in which those opportunities emerged most often was to be speaker and to be, in many instances, preacher, teacher. I tell people all the time, and Dr. Brown, you certainly know this over time, and that is, you can invite me to do anything. You can invite me to do a lecture, you can invite me to do a panel, you can invite me to, but whatever you invite me to do, you're going to get a sermon one way or another. That's really all I know how to do. But at one point, when Barney Graham was still here in Nashville, Tennessee, he invited me to be the speaker for a luncheon that was a part of an event of the Vaccine Trial Network, which he was a part of then. He was still at Vanderbilt at that point before he moved up to NIH. And one of the things that happened at that luncheon was, a consequence of it was that the person who was heading up a major part of the national and even global initiative around HIV, and the whole idea of having a faith-focused dimension of the response was something that was just really coming to the horizon. Mm-hmm. And even though there were some people, let me be clear, that were along with us who already were doing the work, you have to appreciate the fact that, Deborah Fraser Howes had by that time founded the Black clergy focus that came from out of New York City. We also had, I guess, Vanessa Seal, who was dealing with the same issues, but she was bringing faith community to the table. When I was asked to become a part of the response that was being developed by the which is referred to as the, basically it's important to me. The Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center out in Seattle became the point for the research that was going on around HIV/AIDS, vaccine development. The Vaccine Trial Network then later asked me to become a consultant and to be what over time came to be known as an ambassador for their work in terms of working in the faith community. And that's now been, that's now been close to 15 years ago. Oh. But when COVID came along, to get you right up to the moment, yes, we've been doing this work for a long time.
You've been doing the work already.
And I immediately got a midnight call, always referred to it as a midnight call, Larry Corey, who heads up the Fred Hutch Cancer Research Center. Yeah. And Larry had his assistant call and make sure I could be available for a call. But that next morning, Dr. Corey said, look, Ed, why don't we try to take advantage of what you all have done in terms of the other person involved with me very closely in that time was Stephen Wakefield. Steve and I became, bosom buddies and partners in doing this work. And the rest is kind of history, because when we got to COVID, we were able to think about how we could employ some of the same strategies and tactics. And needless to say, this question of fear was very much at the top of the list. We got to the point where we were very clear that you could not talk about seeing greater involvement or more effective response from within our communities if we did not have clergy voices, persons who were trusted voices within our community to somehow get it right and be able to share their understanding in a way that would bring people to the table with a greater sense of willingness. But in order to do that, you could not even begin without being forthright and honest in terms of the reasons why there were apprehensions, in terms of the reasons why there were doubts and fears, because the history of how science has been, guilty.
I'm a pivot, Reverend Sanders. I'm a pivot to Neely Williams, because now I'm curious, all that work that you were doing, did you all's paths intersect with the work that you were doing with HIV? Because she was doing research too. So Reverend Neely, bring me up to speed of the intersection and then pivot around, because I'm learning more about you all, and I know some of the people that you're naming. So Reverend Neely,
oh, well, really, no, they didn't intersect. They emerged from each other. I am a student, a mentee of Edwin Sanders, and I've gone all over this country, and I tell the story every. It probably is not a week that goes by that I don't tell somebody how he moved me from frontline work to do a greater capacity building by encouraging me to develop a coalition. And he handed me a stack of paper, and it was funded. It was a funded grant. He said, now take it and do it. And I used to talk about having meetings with the dogs out in the parking lot because I didn't know what I was doing. But with the work, with his leadership, his guidance, with all the people he's talked about, Vanessa Seals and others during the early age stage, I worked with Reverend Sanders from 95, directly work. I work with him every day. I still work with him. I still preach sermons all over the country, Ed. I do the same thing you do. One day he called me. I have to tell this real quick. He called into the church from out in California somewhere. And I asked him, I said, Reverend Sanders, how do you do it? And he said, Neely, you know the lectionary? I said, oh yeah. Because that we were very student. I still read the lectionary because he taught us, be prepared with the lectionary, get that in your head, get that in your heart every week. And wherever you go, refer to it or work with it. And you will never be surprised. If somebody asks you to do anything, you'll be able to do it. So anyway, I was asking him that, and he told me just what he just told us now, that it's really just one speech, and he does it all wherever he put it in, whatever framework that matches and format that matches that audience that he's bringing it to. And he taught me how to do that. So we work with folks with HIV/AIDS. We work with folks. He under his leadership, I was able to present my thesis for my master's in Geneva, Switzerland. And then I've been involved in major projects and programs across all the funding networks based on my involvement. And still to this day, Ed, I give you credit for your guidance and your teaching of me to help me to be able to do the very things that I do today. And when I encounter him, I'll tell him I'm still on the battlefield, Ed. I'm still doing, anywhere I am, there's some Metropolitan. Because Metropolitan, I'm honored that he continues to keep me on his list of pastoral people. And I literally do carry Metropolitan's message everywhere, because that's my belief. That's my core belief. The inclusivity and non-exclusionary boundaries of the way we practice our faith. That's just who I am. And it's just in me. It's in me, and that's Metropolitan. And so I am grateful to be on this panel with him. He and I had not presented in quite a while together. Wow. But yes, faith. And I ran into immediately when I started this work on COVID, I was out in Seattle and I was working with somebody with the Hutchins Institute, and whose name come up with Edwin Sanders. I said, I know I'm in the right place. So, I mean, it wasn't a planned thing, and they didn't know I knew anything about Edwin Sanders or anything. But I said, oh, okay, I'm connected to the right people.
So let me ask a question here, because we're talking about fear, faith, family, and COVID-19. But what I hear, and I want the viewers to hear this, the methodology didn't change. You had a trusted voice in the community who had access to the people who knew how to get the health information there, which subsequently resulted in the behavioral change, which is why we saw all of a sudden when they couldn't get the information out, what happened? It went back to the church. You know, science tried it and you saw it initially and they said, oh, this is not working.
It's not working.
Trusted voice. But that has been the case on so many issues since the beginning of time. I mean, it's go back to, I mean, the 1800s, if we really want to, and talk about the oral tradition. So my question to you is, how can you explain that maybe to someone who's watching who doesn't understand that? That is a cultural lens, and there's so many other lenses. But when we talk about fear, faith, and family, you can't get to without the middle section of what? Faith.
That's absolutely. And I'll jump right in because I know Ed probably has a lot more profound words on this than I do. But this is the one thing I understand as I have traversed this work. The church is an institution that belongs to the community. And the community will hear the voice of the church. Now, we can talk about the stats, we can talk about the data, I can tell you that 70% of the people don't go to church. But I tell you what, the 30% that goes touches the lives of the 70% that don't. So it is through the foundation, the one institution. If you even go back to the 1800s, what did we have left but our faith?
Faith.
And we had to conquer our fear. And we had grounded in our family. And that they didn't have anything. And in my work on my doctorate, I did a lot of research about how systems were manipulated around people who were enslaved, who put them in a greater enslavement than they were in the first place. But nevertheless, they have continued to hold on to their faith and their family, and they overcame their fears. Now I turn it over to you, Reverend Sanders.
That's right. Because I want to hear from you, Reverend Sanders, because the question that we keep getting is, where do we go from here? I mean, we went from COVID, right? And then we were talking about monkeypox, and then now we're back to talking about COVID, and then we're talking about vaccines, and then boosters. And I mean, it's so many different things. Where do we go from here? And what is the role that the church will continue to play from a faith lens to get us through it?
Well, one of the things that is the byproduct of social media and the profound impact it has now upon not just our communities, but communities of all dimensions and of all aspects. Let me just tell you, I think that we have developed another level of opportunity in the midst of what has been the horror of COVID-19. The fact is, there's probably a broader base of clergy and congregations that are on the various networks and using the various platforms that are available.
That's right.
Oh, yeah.
And even what we're doing right now, Dr. Brown, is a great example of it, because there's the way in which we probably are able to reach more people who somehow get the word in one way or another that this kind of dialogue and this kind of information dispensation is happening. And it's happening because there are those who understand that there are now numbers of people who can be reached to go far beyond what we had anticipated or what we were able to do. Because think about this in terms of what has transpired. Most of the people who got involved in dealing with HIV and AIDS are persons who have been impacted directly themselves. If you look at the early stage of this disease, one reason why the voices and the faces that were most associated with it were people who were being impacted in ways. But the fact is, most people that got involved in the HIV AIDS movement are people who had altruistic reasons. It was someone you knew. It was someone you loved. It was someone that was a part of your circle of relationships. But with AIDS, we always had to deal with, and this goes to the fear and the faith dimension of it. There's a way in which we probably were always behind in our weaving issues of sexuality, human sexuality, into the ways in which we dealt with addressing issues in community. Because unfortunately, the faith community has not been always in the forefront in a positive sense in terms of how issues of sexuality were being addressed. But increasingly, as there have been persons who have been grounded in their faith, but at the same time being very much a part of the global even research initiatives that have been going on around HIV and other infectious diseases. A good example is how many persons there are. We were blessed here at Metropolitan in that early on, well, not at the very beginning, but it wasn't long before persons like, I mentioned Barney Graham's name a little while ago. Barney and his wife, Cynthia. Cynthia is a psychiatrist, Barney is a virologist and an infectious disease doctor. And they were members of Metropolitan Church. I've got pictures of Barney. I've got pictures of Barney, and Neely's been around when they were, in the church, singing in the choir and doing other stuff that was going on. But what it meant was another trusted voice. I remember when we were talking about trying to encourage people to become a part of the trials and persons to also take advantage of the developments that had come along with HIV, and then subsequently also what we were dealing with when it came down to COVID. The whole thing was that there was this moment when there were people who were willing to talk about the issues that for too long had been taboo in our communities. And I think Neely probably can remember how that became a challenge to us. We have experienced in many ways significant attrition in the size of our congregation as the issues became tougher for people to deal with.
Yep.
Whether it be just the whole question of how you treat, how you accept, how you encourage, how you affirm same gender loving people in a way that allow the gift of God's love to be a part of their lives in a way that had not been the case before. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of hurt, there was a lot of pain, there's a lot of, stigmatizing kinds of experiences that people who were susceptible to this disease were experiencing. But then as we came to realize that it was nonsense to think about this disease as being peculiar only to same gender loving people, we started to get people to understand that we needed to carry the banner a little stronger, and the church had to become a voice. Always, I must admit, I think always I remember that it was Dr. Hildreth who I first heard say this years ago, and that is, he said there are three things all people are going to do. They're going to drink water, they're going to eat food, and they're going to have sex. And there's a way in which you have to realize that all of us are here as a byproduct of two people who had sex. So to not talk about sex, it ends up being important for us to realize how that becomes a part of our faith tradition. But the other thing that Reverend Neely said that I would just share with you in terms of how you make and how we made some of the network of information dissemination as positive as it was before we had such a broad base social media network is because of things like the lectionary that she was saying she picked up on as a part of something that I was always trying to do. Because one of the things I discovered about using the lectionary, and I should tell you who it came from, because then you'll see the intersection of how liberation movements have impacted us on every level and end up being hand in glove in terms of how it's come to be a part of what has to happen. I remember, and Metropolitan Church is now, good grief, it blows my mind to think about it, but we're going to be 42 years old in February. Okay. And I remember in some of the early days of Metropolitan Church, it's, when people ask us how long we've been doing HIV/AIDS work, I very often, the year changes every year. So I often tell people that we've been doing HIV/AIDS work for, right now, it's at about 38 years. But every time it's a year longer, it's further, because we started doing it because of the death I made reference to. But at that point, my mentor is James Morris Lawson from my childhood. James Morris Lawson became my pastor when I was 14 years old. And I remember I was 14 and he was 33. And now I'm 75 and he's 94. And he's still my mentor and friend. But I remember going to him saying, Jim, how do I become more effective in ministry around preaching? And I remember he told me at a young age, he said, preach the lectionary. Now, luckily, Neely was not as stubborn as I was, because I went back to Jim many times and said, Jim, come on now. It's got to be something more than preach the lectionary. He said, just preach the lectionary. And he said the rigor that is required in order to go through, because it requires usually dealing with texts and dealing with understandings of the Bible that go well beyond what you most often will hear. So anyway, I did it. And it's also been a part of what's allowed us to have impact, because I thought it was great to have something that if it's done as it should be, what you do on Sunday morning can be a part of a Monday morning conversation, because that means that persons who have heard a lectionary message can go to anybody who was in any mainstream denominational church and say, what did your pastor talk about yesterday? And sometimes it ends up being mind-boggling to folk when they say, oh, he said, well, it's the same thing my pastor talked about yesterday. The same text anyway. You can go in many different directions in terms of what you deal with in it. So I'm just saying we've got a platform that really existed before we had the social media phenomenon being as dominant as it is now. So, and we've learned how to use that. And we've learned how to use it. I've also seen a tremendous impact that this part of the work we've done over the years that we've been involved and others have been involved. I mentioned a little while ago the way in which, the Black Leadership Commission on AIDS, which was, started by Deborah Fraser Howes, created a network of preachers that were talking about this issue of HIV. Some people just, well, anyway, I could kind of go on in that, because that network is one that is tremendous. And of course, I always tell Panessa, has just because of the week of prayer for the healing of AIDS, they think there's right in the neighborhood of being 10,000 churches every year that do something around the week of prayer for the healing of AIDS, even if it's just work into the agenda, so people hear it, they hear it coming from the pulpit, and then they are at least more open-minded. And the last thing I would tell you about COVID is this. Just like I said to you, there's a way in which people who gravitated towards HIV and AIDS had altruistic reasons. Well, then there was a reluctance to say, my son, my nephew, my husband, my uncle, my sister, my brother died from AIDS. There was a tremendous reluctance to do that. Back then, they would say they died from a heart attack, they died from a stroke, they died from pneumonia, they died. Well, they probably did die from pneumonia, but it was pneumocystis pneumonia, which is only, one that you would be vulnerable to if your immune system were compromised to begin with. And the same thing is true in terms of those other diseases. But what happened then was people were in denial and did not want to have it said that the death of their loved one, their friend, their family member was because of a disease that was framed as being a sexually transmitted disease, especially by same gender loving people. But if you then go to what happened with COVID, one reason why it was a little bit less challenging in some ways, the only thing that I think made COVID more difficult was the rapidity, the way in which we had to move so fast to make sure we curbed the spread that was moving at a speed and a rate that had potential of becoming a much more devastating pandemic that it ended up being. Absolutely. But what do you find? Then who ended up being the people? Think about the first cases of COVID. The first cases of COVID were not somebody talking about same gender loving people. It was folk talking about their friends, their relatives that were in nursing homes. You know, people forget that first experience with COVID happened in just outside of Seattle when they had that, you know, the spread of the disease in a single nursing home. And within weeks and months, it was all over the place, including right up here in Gallatin, Tennessee. So you see the altruistic dimension of it became much broader because everybody's got a grandmama and everybody's got an elderly friend and everybody. Right. Yeah. So let me
ask you this, because we can be here all day. Now, first of all, we have got to laugh because this you only wellness say is 10 minutes. I knew it wasn't gonna be 10 minutes with us because we're family. So here's my question. As we wrap up, what is the message that each of you wants to share with the community? And I'm gonna give you each a moment. We're gonna try to keep it 2 minutes each.
All right.
See how we do. But what is the message as it relates to fear, faith, and COVID-19 that you want to share? I mean, because this message is going to go to people all around the world. So when you look at it and they look at your eyes and as they're watching this, what do they need to know? I'll give it to whoever wants to go first. You want to go first, Reverend Neely?
I think I could take it on and just say that the message I would like to share with the world, or for those that will hear this message, is fear has become not only our enemy, but also our friend, because it has caused us to have to depend on our faith. And as we dealt with COVID-19. And it has, in many situations and circumstances when we do this work, we hear the past fears of those that have been impacted by this disease. And then we also hear them grounded in the recognition that by their faith, as a common phrase in our theological world says, but God, even though they lost aunties and grandmamas and loved ones, but God. And it has, and I think we can all see this. And I really want to encourage people who hear this message, if it's pre or post the holiday season, we see a fervor in the community of people wanting to be together, wanting to celebrate, wanting to be a part of some kind of family unit that we used to take for granted. And I'm like Reverend Sanders, as certainly we can see the benefits that have come from social media, the way we've had to embrace it. And so we've turned this thing on its heel. And I want to say to the community, let's keep it going. Let's keep it on the run. Let's move forward, encouraging each and every one of our loved ones and family members to get the boosters and to get the vaccinations they need so that they can live well and be healthy post-COVID-19.
Praise God.
Yes, Reverend Sanders.
All right. It's hard for me to say anything in 5 minutes. How many minutes do I have? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. All right. But let me just let me share something, because it's deep in my heart, and I guarantee you, each one of you will be able to resonate with this. So I'm 75, and I remember when I was going to schools, really all over the Central South, because my dad was a Methodist minister, and we moved around a lot. He died when I was 11. But I can remember from my childhood learning the song, Lift Every Voice and Sing. Now, I'm always amazed by the fact that you can go into a audience that has a connection to the African American experience, and someone will say, would you lead us in prayer? You can start off by saying, God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who has by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever, we pray. Lest you go on with that. You could stop right there and then go. Some people just use it as an introduction to prayer, but it makes you realize that same prayer, okay, that we associate with James Weldon Johnson. He and his brother, actually, one wrote the music, the other wrote the words. But what I'm saying is that if you listen to it, you realize it's the same prayer that was being prayed in the 19th century. It's the same prayer. And then, it wasn't until the 20th century that, even before the middle of the 20th century, that lift of a voice and sing came along. It's amazing how powerful to think that a part of our teaching, a part of our nurture, a part of our growth has been built around some words like that. It's not the only ones. I can remember, that my dad, every time he prayed, always used the words that are part of a song that will forever live in my heart. And that is, but this, I'm just saying, we've got seeds that have been sown. So here's your 2-minute sermon. I tell people that one of the things, Neely, I'm almost embarrassed to say that it took me as many years as I am now in age. But it's only been in the last few years that I first saw a way of speaking to that story of the sower, the parable of the sower. And the idea is, everybody knows it, the sower is going along and some seed is falling on the path and some is falling in rocky ground and some is falling amongst the weeds and other in the thorns. You know the story, it's the way it goes. But the thing that is so powerful about that story, which allows us to continue to encourage people to have hope and to be able to think in terms of the possibilities of life that go beyond our imagination and our ability to conceptualize, is this: the sower never stops sowing. And I think that there's an idea of seeing, I now talk about it in terms of being the extravagance of God. The extravagance of God, because God has never stopped sowing seeds, in our midst and in our communities and beyond. And the one thing that we have never been accused of as being a people lacking in spirituality. There might be all kinds of yardsticks that folks have tried to use. So what we have to do is be sure that we build upon what's inherent, what's foundational, what's at the core, what's at the center, okay? And I think that's what the church has been able to do, is take any issue and then be able to frame it in a way that if it's an avenue that leads to hope, if it's an avenue that leads to transformation, an avenue that leads to change, we've got something that we can talk to folks about that they will identify with, even if there's a difference of opinion. One thing I will tell you about my work around HIV and our work around HIV, there have been a lot of people who early on disagreed. But if you look at what's happened over time, and I can go and almost call names, I can call the roll all over town and all over the country in this, there was disagreement, but there's a way in which over time there became respect.
Mm-hmm.
You might disagree with the message that challenges some of what has been ingrained in them in terms of these negative thinking, in terms of sexuality and the like. But over time, it is always translated into that which you could get people to hear. And once hearing it, over time, at least respecting what you're doing. So we have to be the ones who continue to hold on to that respect.
I love it. First of all, this by far, there was no one else that I could have on this 50th episode except for the two of you. Because you spoke to so many different things, but it summarizes what we were trying to do. I mean, all this work, all the time, and the ways in which you both have been in the community and engaged the community and do that. So my heart is filled, and I know the viewers will be. So I just want to say thank you both so much for being here, a part of history, because, I was telling someone today, I said, we have an oral archive. This right here, this is not just a video. This is a oral archive of life as it has happened and as we know it. And even the words that you have spoken about, the songs and all these different things, it just speaks to informal education that we utilize throughout history.
That's right.
And that's the thing I tell people. They say, well, if the brain was, incapable of higher order thinking, then why forbid, right, the enslaved to learn? Because we were always capable. We just did it in very covert ways. And you have talked about the covert operation of health education through the faith-based institution. I mean, if they miss that, they have missed so much today on this episode.
We need to take her with us, Ed, everywhere we go.
That's right. That's right.
Open up for us so they can hear what we got to say.
Yeah. Well, she's gotten to where lately, Neely, she helps me go places a little bit too. So that's great. And especially help us in terms of what we're doing here at Metropolitan, because right now my dream and my goal is that we would be able to develop something that can be emulated and something that can be replicated, because there's no reason why any church, I like the way, I love to think of Metropolitan Church as being the little church on the side of the hill in Nashville.
Yes.
But I do know that the little church on the side of the hill in Nashville has managed to have tentacles now that reach all around the world.
All around the world. So how can people get in touch with both of you? Please share your contact information, because we're going to also put it below the video, but I just want people to know. And then you have not talked about the health clinic. And I feel like—
that's I was going to come to next. Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Yeah. Well, no, but that's the thing, Katherine, that I really am excited about trying to continue to nurture and grow.
Okay.
Because I know that is something that can be replicated. I mean, and I don't want to in any way sound discouraged to people in this regard. Let me tell you, I'm convinced it's something we can do with the resource within our community. Neely, you might remember when we first started doing the First Response Center, especially when we were doing MICTAN, okay? There's a way in which what we found when we were doing MICTAN is that when we would go places, the first thing people would say to us all the time is, well, can you show us how to write a grant? And can you show us how we get a 501c3? And can you show it? They would go through all that. And that's important. But I've been trying to get folks to see that there is effective work that can be done with a lot less resource than you would think.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah, because we do have people in our communities who can lend their expertise, their wisdom. I mean, and that's what, Dr. Brown has done with, many of the women that she works with in terms of some of the initiatives that we've been able to do.
Yeah. Yes.
It's we always say, people, we don't have a lot of money, but we got enough. We've always had enough. We've always had enough. It's a matter of what we do with it.
What we do with it. That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Same thing. I said, go start it. Don't wait till you get this or that.
Right.
Go do it.
That's right.
Go do it.
Yeah.
And you can get those other things, but you can't, if you're waiting to do it to get those things, it don't work that way.
Yeah. One of the best things that ever happened to us in the early stages of our involvement with HIV was being rejected by funders, especially on the federal level. And because it was the state that was really a stumbling block for us a lot. But it's amazing because we just simply said we're going to do it anyway. And when the Minority AIDS Initiative came along, we were the only congregation in Nashville that was eligible to apply, because one of the little tricks they put in it, which was determined to get in the way of things happening we want, was they said you had to have some evidence of at least 2 or 3 years experience in dealing with the work. We've been getting turned down for 3 or 4 years. But we went on and did the work anyway.
I love it. Some form of it we always did. And no matter how we wrote that grant, we're going to do that project, whether we get funding or not, some kind of way.
Right.
I love it. I know we're going to be doing some things together in the future, because we always do. I look forward to it. Now, I went to your website. Will you want people to go to the MICwhosoever.org? Because that's what I see. Or do you want a different one? And I see, Reverend Neely, you have put your Gmail, which is neely.williams1@gmail.com.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you.
TN CEAL.
So I'll throw my plug in here now. We need to revamp our website. It's okay, but we got a lot of work that needs to be done on it. So I would
Get you a
encourage
young
you.
student. Yeah, get you a student and let them go at it. They can do it.
That's
It's probably
exactly
somebody
what.
watching right now. They're so fired up, and they're saying they want to help with that.
Yeah. I should say that one of the things I've learned, and I don't say this just because you have Reverend Neely on this with me, but I will tell as I look at both of you, okay? And I don't hesitate to tell folks when they say, Ed, how have you all been able to do this? And how have you been able to accomplish this? And I tell people all the time, but one of the things that I am real clear about is the importance of surrounding yourself with people smarter than you are. So that's I mean, it's key.
Oh,
Because and you have to get your ego out the way. That's how I changed my title from being pastor or minister to just simply the senior servant. Because I mean, biblically it says very clearly, that those who would lead have to be able to serve.
Yes,
but I've tried to get people who I know are smarter than I am. You even know that if you look at my married life. Some people refer to their wives as their better half. I call Billy my better three quarters. But surround yourself with people smarter than you are.
Oh my goodness! Well, thank you for being here today.
I love you guys.
Appreciate you. And for our viewers around the world, you have just met the senior servant, Edwin Sanders and Reverend Neely Williams. Please like this message, share this message so that it makes it all around the world. Until next time, I am Dr. Katherine Y. Brown, your host. Have a great day, friends.